Of the skin. These are things that are derived from the same tissues as skin and will include things like hair, nails, and some glands. So we'll start with hair. Hair is dead keratinized cells, very similar to what we said skin was. Uh, we don't have hair located on the palms of our hands, the soles of our feet, lips, nipples, and parts of our external genitalia. And I know 3 or 4 of you just looked at the palms of your hand to make sure. The function of skin is to warn us of insects. As insects are crawling along, they will trigger sensitive nerves, and that will let us know that there are insects on us so we can swat them. The hair on our head can help protect us against physical trauma. It's a little bit of a cushion when you fall. Uh, Skin is very important to protect us. Our hair is very important to protect us from heat loss, and it also helps to shield our skin from sunlight. The hair, also called pili, are flexible strands of dead keratinized cells. So instead of being flattened keratinized cells that we had in skin, they're flexible strands of them. They're produced within a structure called the hair follicle. They have keratin, but it's a different form of keratin than we find in the skin. It's a hard keratin, not the soft keratin. Hard keratin is tougher, more durable, and our cells don't flake off. The hair is divided into the shaft, which is anything above the scalp, where keratinization is complete, and a root, which is within the scalp, and that's where keratinization is still going on. 3 parts to that shaft include the medulla, the cortex, and the cuticle. The medulla is the central core. Large cells and air spaces are found in there. The cortex is several layers, flattened cells that surround that medulla. And the cuticle is the outer layer where we have overlapping layers of single cells. Hair pigments are made by melanocytes, just like they were in the skin. These melanocytes are found in hair follicles. There are different melanins, yellow, rust-colored, brown, and black, and together combinations of those can create all the hair colors except red. Red hair has an additional pigment called pheomelanin. Gray and white hair results when melanin production decreases and air bubbles replace the melanin within the shaft. So here's a cross section of a hair. We have the medulla in the middle, the let's see, I'm not following this quite right. Cuticle on the edge, cortex. This is within the follicle. So this region up here is the root sheath. Down here is the internal root sheath. So this actually is just the hair itself that we've been talking about. The hair follicle extends from the epidermis surface to the dermis. The bulb is an expanded area deep at the end of the follicle. There is a hair follicle receptor or root hair plexus, which is a sensory nerve ending that wraps around the bulb, and the hair, for that reason, is considered a sensory touch receptor. This is what insects trigger to let us know that they are there. The wall of the follicle has a peripheral connective tissue sheath derived from the dermis. It's also called a fibrous sheath. There is a glassy membrane, which is a thickened basal lamina, and an epithelial root sheath, which is derived from epidermis. The matrix is the actively dividing area, so cells within this area are actively dividing, going through mitosis. As the matrix makes new cells, the other ones get pushed upward, similar to what we saw at skin. There is a muscle, smooth muscle, called arrector pili, which attached to the follicle, and it's when that muscle contracts, we get goosebumps. Hair papillae are dermal tissues that have a knot of capillaries supplying nutrients to that growing hair. So here is our hair papillae filled with capillaries supplying nutrients to these. We have melanocytes spread out, other cells growing, and as these cells divide, they push their way upwards. And this gives us the medulla, cortex, remember this is three-dimensional, and cuticle on the edge. There are several different kinds of hair, and they grow several different ways it can grow. Vellus hairs are pale, fine body hairs found on children and adult females. Terminal hairs are coarse, long hairs. They're found on our scalp and our eyebrows. At puberty, terminal hairs also begin to appear in the axillary and pubic regions in both sexes and on the face and neck of males. Nutrition and hormones affect hair growth. Each of those follicles cycles between an active and a regressive phase. The average growth of hair per week is 2¼ millimeters, and we lose about 90 scalp hairs a day on average. In women, ovaries and adrenal glands produce small amounts of androgens, which are the male sex hormones. Tumors on those organs can cause abnormally large amounts of those androgens, things like polycystic ovary syndrome, and that can result in excessive hairiness called hirsutism, and there are other signs of masculinization. In many cases, no clinical problem is found from these. Alopecia is the thinning of hair, begins in both sexes after the age of 40. Frank baldness or true baldness is a genetically determined sex-influenced condition. One type is male pattern baldness that's caused by follicular response to testosterone. TE is an abrupt hair thinning that's caused by an abundance of hair follicles entering the resting phase at the same time. That can be due to stress-induced factors, hormonal changes, surgery, emotional trauma, crash dieting. Other causes of thinning and or loss, texture change of hair include some drugs that will have an effect on cell growth, hypothyroidism, or if your diet is deficient in proteins, amino acids. Next modification we'll talk about are nails. Nails are scale-like modifications of the epidermis, and they are also filled with keratin. They provide then it's the hard keratin. They act as a protective cover for the distal dorsal surfaces of our fingers and toes. Distal far away, dorsal on top, and fingers and toes. They have a free edge, a nail plate, and a root. The nail bed is in the epidermis underneath the keratinized nail plate, and the nail matrix is a thickened portion of the bed responsible for nail growth. The nail folds are the skin that overlap the border of the nail. The eponecrium is a nail fold that projects onto the surface of the nail body. We typically refer to that as a cuticle. Hyponecrium is the area under the free edge of the plate that accumulates dirt at the top end. And nails normally appear pink because the underlying capillaries have a reddish hue to them. There is a little white region near the nail matrix called lanula, and abnormal colors or shapes of nails can be indicators of diseases. So here is our nail fold, the epicurium or cuticle, nail plate, the free edge. And if we look at the cross section here, you see the hyperconium, the nail bed, and this would be the end of our finger. And back here we have the matrix. Nail appearance can help diagnose some diseases. Yellow tinge might indicate respiratory or thyroid gland disorder. Thickened yellow nails can be due to fungal infections. Coilicana is also called spoon nail. You'll see a picture of that in a second. Is an outward concavity of the nail that may be from an iron deficiency. And there are things called Bowes lines, which are horizontal lines across the nail that might indicate severe illnesses, uncontrolled diabetes, heart attack, or chemotherapy. Sweat glands are also called sudoriferous glands. These are another appendage of the skin. All of the skin surfaces, except for the nipples and parts of the external genitalia, contain sweat glands. There are about 3 million glands per person. They come in two major types, the eccrine and the apocrine. The eccrine or merocrine are sweat glands. The apocrine are also sweat glands. Their contents are a little different. They are made up of myoepithelial cells. So, as myo still refers to muscle, so these are kind of a combination between epithelial cell and muscle cells because they have the ability to contract when the nervous system tells them to and force the sweat into the ducts, which lead to the surface of our skin. So the first one, the eccrine or merocrine sweat glands, are the most numerous type. They are abundant, especially on our palms, the soles of our feet, our forehead. Their ducts connect to pores. Their function is in thermoregulation, keeping body temperature. We'll get to that later on. That's regulated by the sympathetic nervous system. And what they secrete is sweat, what we typically call sweat, about 99% water, salt, vitamin C, antibodies, a microbial killing peptide called dermacidin, and some metabolic wastes. The apocrine glands are confined to the axillary and anogenital areas. They secrete a more viscous, milky, yellowish sweat because that sweat contains fatty acids and proteins. Those fatty acids and proteins are, fortunately or unfortunately, a very good fuel source, food source for bacteria. So bacteria can get into these, break down that sweat, and that leads to body odors. They are larger than eccrine sweat glands. Their ducts empty into hair follicles, and they do not begin functioning until puberty. And as yet, their function is really not known. There are some modified apocrine glands. The ceremonious glands are in the external ear. They secrete cerumen, which is earwax, and mammary glands are also modified apocrine sweat glands. They secrete milk, baby's milk. The sebaceous glands are widely distributed. These are the oil glands, except on the thick skin of palms and soles. Most develop from hair follicles and secrete into hair follicles. These, again, are relatively inactive until puberty. They are stimulated by hormones, especially the male sex hormones, the androgens, and their secretion is called sebum, which is an oily holocrine secretion that contains bacterial killing or bactericidal properties and helps to soften hair and skin. So if we look at all three glands together, we see the eccrine sweat glands, the apocrine sweat glands, and the oil or sebaceous glands. And if we looked at a typical hair, we would see in that section probably all three. So over here, we start with the eccrine sweat glands. They're important for controlling temperature. They have some antibiotic properties or bactericidal properties. They have a hypotonic filtrate, or are a hypotonic filtrate of blood plasma. It's derived from blood. The sweat is derived from plasma. They secrete using exocytosis or a merocrine function. They're found on the skin's surface. The duct opens to the surface, and they are found everywhere, and especially on palms, soles, and forehead. Apocrine sweat glands empty onto filtrate blood plasma, just like the eccrine. But in addition to that, fatty acids and proteins are added to it. They still use a merocrine or exocytosis property to secrete their substance, and they're usually found on a hair follicle, sometimes on skin surface, mostly on hair follicles, and they are mostly in the axillary and anogenital regions. The sebaceous glands are closely associated with the hair follicle. They help to lubricate the hair and skin, prevent water loss, and have antibacterial properties. Their secretion is sebum, which is an oily secretion, and they use a holocrine method of secretion. And they are found, again, on the upper part of a hair follicle and at times on skin surface. And they are found everywhere except the palms and the soles. Acne is usually an infectious inflammation of the sebaceous gland that results in pimples, also called pustules or cysts, associated with a Propionibacterium acne infection, P. acne. Whiteheads are blocked sebaceous glands. When that blocked sebaceous gland secretion becomes oxidized or literally rusts. The whitehead becomes a blackhead. Overactive sebaceous gland in infants can lead to what is called cradle cap, or more correctly, seborrhea, which starts off as a pink raised lesion on the scalp that begins to turn yellowish brown and flakes off, and is exemplified here. All right, we'll pick it up later on with the functions of the skin.